What's the scariest thing that's ever happened to you? Story 1. When I was 5, the neighbor kid and I, if an axe could cut a wire on a downed telephone pole, after a few unsuccessful tries, where the wire kept moving away from the axe, we decided we needed to hold it in place. As I was the younger and weaker of the two, holding the wire fell to me. The scary part was running home carrying the first 3 fingers on my left hand with my right hand. I kicked the door until Mom opened it, and then had the door slammed in my face. A few seconds later, Mom and Dad came out in a panic. Dad wrapped my hand in a cloth and drove as fast as he could to the clinic. I lay on a steel table with my hand over a bucket and a bright light above me. I woke up 3 days later in a different hospital with my fingers reattached. It could have been worse, but it was still pretty traumatic. Hey kids, don't play with axes. Opinion. Man, the scene must have left your mom in shock. She even slammed the door in your face. LOL. I remember doing some pretty reckless stuff as a kid too. I'm just thankful none of it left any permanent scars. Story 2. When I had an episode of sleep paralysis, my body was frozen and my brain was awake. For some reason, I felt a tremendous amount of fear. I was like having a seizure without actually moving, gasping for air. My mind was focused on the wall across my bed where there was a message in dark lettering. I could not focus on what it said. All I can remember was trying to focus and trying to read it, but I couldn't. I physically saw my blankets get ripped off my bed, but within a second or two, my mind refocused, and they were still on me. I am not religious, but I started praying. I couldn't even speak, just rapid mumbling. This was all while I was frozen. Happened to me 2 times, very similar experience. Since then, has not happened again. Opinion. I can't imagine how frightening it must have been to be frozen and see things that weren't really happening. Glad you haven't had to go through that again. Story 3. A conflict broke out. It happened during the school day. It wasn't safe to go home. The entire school was full of kids who didn't want to be harmed, just for trying to make school important and impactful for their future benefit. It wasn't safe for our parents to come to collect us until something like 3 a.m. We were just a whole school full of kids who could have been in danger due to the conflict. I should perhaps point out I am an expat. Was born and raised in Jakarta. I'm essentially referencing the British International School, Jakarta, in the 1996 to 1998 period of unrest that Indonesia was experiencing. Basically, the most affluent school in Indonesia, and all the students knew that. This only made our fear more valid because targeting the affluent was essentially what the whole situation erupted over. We were the children of the wealthy, so were more than valid targets. It was actually so frightening that it was when I actually gave up on everything schoolwork, being accepted, whatever. It instilled in me the awareness that no matter what I try or do, recovery from major disruptions is the only skill worth putting any effort into. I will never have control over my destiny. The vast universe will always throw whatever it wants at me and never care about my opinions in the first place. Opinion. It's chilling how quickly your life changed from a normal school day to being in such an immediate danger. One moment you're safe and the next, you're facing a crisis like that. I take it as a reminder of how fast things can shift and how little control we really have over our fate. Story 4. I used to install drop ceilings for a living and worked on a large project at a school for deaf children that had a reputation for being haunted. My boss and I went in on a Saturday because if you've ever worked in construction, you know it's great to be the only ones there. You can get 2 days of work done in one day without having to work around multiple teams of people. Anyway, The place was eerie enough to unsettle both of us, even though we were around 40 and 50 years old at the time. We started on opposite ends of a long hallway with plans to meet in the middle. After about an hour, I was in my first room, and Kenny began working in the room next to me instead of at the opposite end of the hallway. I went over to the next room before taking a break and noticed some of his tools and equipment at the end of the hall, but Kenny wasn't there. At this point, I was feeling quite unsettled because it was clear he was supposed to be in the room next to me, not 50 yards away. I walked down the hall and asked him if he had come to this area, and he mentioned something about me working in the room adjacent to him. At that moment, both of us noticed something at the doorway of the room we were in. It felt as though I saw something in my peripheral vision but couldn't describe it, and he looked at me like we needed to leave immediately. We left all our equipment behind and decided never to work alone in such places again. Even now, nearly 15 years later, I still get intense goosebumps and my eyes water when I think about that experience. There were other strange occurrences at that location, but this is the main story. I also lived in a rather spooky house at one point, but that's a story for another time. Opinion. That's exactly how I imagine seeing a ghost feels. Nothing like in the movies with detailed descriptions. It's just a quick flash and a heavy feeling of dread, where you know something was there but can't actually describe it. Story 5. Maybe not as frightening, but it was quite unsettling when my grandpa didn't show up for Christmas dinner, and I went to look for him. I walked all the way from my family's house to his, hoping to find him. When I arrived and entered the house, the lights were out, and it was already dark outside, and I had a really bad feeling. I was genuinely worried I might find my grandpa unresponsive. Fortunately, he was alive and had only fallen and broken his hip, which prevented him from getting up. Thankfully, he is doing fantastic now and is recovering very well, but that was a very distressing 15 minutes that felt like hours. Opinion. You're a hero for checking on your grandpa. If you hadn't been there, it could have been much worse. Story 6. I used to hitchhike frequently. One time I got into a car with a driver who wouldn't let me out. I had to jump out of the car when it was going about 40 miles per hour down the highway. After that experience, I never hitchhiked again. Opinion. That sounds incredibly frightening. I can't imagine the fear you must have felt. Unfortunately, we live in a world where we can't always trust strangers, and I think you did the right thing by getting out of that car. Story 7. I work on workshops, and for a brief period in 2015 or 2016, not sure right now, I was working in Nigerian waters. The ship's policy was to only allow work on deck during daylight hours due to security concerns and to lock the vessel down at night. Well, one night there was emergency work that needed to be done, so we were out on deck, ready to start but waiting for the work permit. For some reason, the permit never came, so we packed up and went back inside, locking up behind us. About half an hour after we locked up, we were attacked by a small group of intruders. I still remember the surreal feeling of looking out of my cabin window and seeing someone suddenly climbing onto the main deck, holding a long distance hole puncher. The whole ship went into emergency lockdown, and we all went to the safe room deep inside the engine room, where we spent the night on the steel floor waiting for help to arrive. The Nigerian Navy was nearby and received our calls for assistance, but they didn't board at night. They only did a security sweep of the vessel the next morning. In the end, nothing was stolen, and no one was taken, because we had locked down and the intruders must have been after ransom. Opinion. One of the last things you'd expect is someone boarding your ship in the middle of the ocean. You would think that's one of the safest places for people. It must have been terrifying. Story 8. The day I woke up to my parents in a panic because my brother had gone missing overnight, and a self-deletion note was left behind. The fear over the next 12 hours while we searched for him was agonizing, but nothing compared to the pain of having our worst fears confirmed. Opinion. That's awful. The fear and pain of searching and then facing your worst fears must have been unbearable. I really do hope you and your family are doing okay. Story 9. I had an asthma attack once so severe that I could barely communicate with the 911 operator. I stood in my driveway with my wallet in my hand, leaning against a tree, gasping for air and hoping she could understand me. As the sirens got closer, I held on as long as I could, and then my vision faded to black. I woke up 10 days later in the ICU. Opinion. Even mild asthma attacks can be serious. Struggling to breathe and being unable to do anything about it sounds like one of the worst experiences you could ever have. Story 10. When I was 12, I had my tonsils removed. After the surgery, I kept telling my parents that I tasted blood, but they reassured me it was just from the procedure and not to worry. A week later, my mom left me home alone for the first time since the surgery to run errands. While I was in bed watching TV, I started coughing and then vomiting large amounts of blood. It wouldn't stop, and then I began choking because some of it had coagulated in my stomach. I managed to call 911, and when they found me in the kitchen, it looked like a crime scene. It turned out that the doctor had accidentally made a small cut in a blood vessel, and I had been slowly bleeding for a week. I had lost half the blood in my body. They rushed me back into surgery, fixed the issue, and sent me home. A week later, I again told my mom I tasted blood. She told me not to worry, but that night I woke up vomiting blood and passed out. Another surgery resolved it. It was a nightmare. Opinion. The way your mom handled your concerns was deeply troubling. Ignoring your repeated warnings and only reacting when the situation was severe is hard to understand. I can't imagine thinking, last time they tasted blood, they almost lost their life. But I'm sure it's nothing this time. Either your mom is dense, or she doesn't like you that much. Story 11. My ex husband's dealer broke into the house while I was home alone. Thank goodness my daughters weren't there. I had just enough time to hide in my walk in closet under a pile of blankets. He was on the phone with someone while searching the house and shouting threats. I had my phone with me and, like in a suspenseful movie, I called 911 and whispered for help. He opened the closet but didn't see me. I still feel anxious thinking about it. The police arrived in 2 or 3 minutes and he fled, but they apprehended him shortly after. That was one of the most frightening experiences I've ever had. Opinion. Hiding while someone is ransacking your home must have been incredibly intense. I'm glad you were able to stay calm enough to call 911 and that they caught him. It's a relief that there are now options like texting the police in emergencies to help ensure your safety. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and activate the bell button to receive notifications to my latest videos.